Train is about 13 and a half years old. We started as a one-time annual event, had no intention of starting an arts organization, but here we are. Really kind of the impetus behind the original event, it was myself, my now husband, and 3 of our friends wanted to solve kind of multiple problems that we saw happening in Spokane. One, if you grew up in Spokane, this narrative was told to you, and that was if you were going to be quote unquote successful or have fun in your 20s, you were going to do it anywhere but Spokane, Washington. And despite that kind of massive brain drain that was happening, there were these really amazing pockets of creativity that they were all siloed from each other. We had, visual artists over here, we had musicians over here, we had the literary world over here, but there was no real kind of collaboration or synergy happening within those groups. We also felt like there was a big divide between what we kind of deemed as emerging artists, kind of the burgeoning undercurrent of the creative culture in Spokane, and the more established artists. And then kind of a third issue or problem that we saw is who was getting invited to engage with art and who wasn't. And really that first kind of flagship event that we did was wanting to get all of those groups of people together in a single room for a single evening to see what would happen. About an hour and a half into that first event, we realized that we had tapped into something pretty special. Fast forward the next year, and it was right around the time that we did the initial terrain. And people started asking if we were going to throw the event again. And we kind of looked around at each other and said, sure, why not? I should have mentioned that very first terrain that we did, we literally had to beg 30 artists to participate in it, but about 1,500 people showed up. So we decided to do the second terrain, and our artists doubled. We had about 60 artists participate in that event, and about 3,000 people showed up. And then fast forward to 2018 was the last time we could do the big flagship event pre-pandemic, and we represented 274 artists and 13,000 people come through the event in a single evening. It's great to throw this event that is pride of place and celebrates who we are as a community, but what is the infrastructure? What are the resources and tools that our creative community needs in order to kind of retain that talent here in Spokane? We needed to connect artists to art patrons. We needed to start to advocate to city officials and to state officials around the value of art. We needed to start to create, again, ways for artists and creatives in our community to actually make money doing what they love. So we started another event called Bazaar, which is a big art market that we do every year. That event has grown tremendously again. Artists tend to sell about $125,000 worth of art in a single day at that event. And again, 10 to 15,000 people come down. We have a winter version of that called Bazaar. And then we have things that are ongoing programming. So we have this gallery space that we're sitting in. We have a retail storefront called From Here. 102 artists sell out of that storefront. So in addition to financially supporting artists, in addition to mentoring artists, our role is really to break down systems of oppression. It's about pushing back against white supremacy. It's again about amplifying underrepresented voices. It's about creating and building community. We are a community building organization, and art and creativity is our tool, is our resource in order to do that. So again, we've grown tremendously since that flagship event. But really along the way, and we're continuing to evolve and grow as an organization. We're still pretty scrappy, but really along the way, it's been a conversation with our community, and the programs and events that we do are in response to that. My everyday, work day is anything from answering emails to working with city officials to shutting down streets to making sure we can pay our rent, fundraising, a little bit of everything to kind of keep all of these different programs and events alive and thriving for the organization. We aren't seeing the kinds of financial investment from the city around arts and culture that we need to see, just flat out. When you're looking at cities our size, the Boise's of the world, the Spokanes of the world, we are woefully underfunded. I do think that there are really well-intended folks within city government that do get it, and we are slowly starting to see the needle kind of go in the right direction. There's only like a handful of even corporations that support arts in general. Terrain does not get any city funding. We don't get state funding. Everything that we kind of scrap together in order to survive is by our own means. After the murder of George Floyd, all of a sudden within philanthropy, it's like the woke thing is to support Black artists or artists of color. And to be truthful, some of the thoughts that I've had, and again, conversations with artists reflect this, is where have you been? We've been doing this work always. How do we do the work that we are trying to do? How do we welcome the financial support that we need in order to do our work within the confines of a white supremacist, patriarchal, hierarchical structure? At one point, I literally was like, we gotta make Terrain a B Corp and not a nonprofit. But I do think that there are philosophies and ways of being that are starting to kind of bubble up in the surface that give nonprofits the language they need in order to continue to be a nonprofit, but on their own terms. So one of the things that I have been really struggling with over the last 10 months and after the murder of George Floyd was really, I was more angry than I have ever been in my entire life. And part of my kind of lens and perspective was I really felt really strongly that Terrain's position and role in this community and our work spoke for itself. I started to see, Harriet Tubman being projected on the Robert E. Lee Monument in Virginia. I saw teenage Black ballerinas performing in front of that same statue, and I started to recognize that maybe just saying our work isn't enough. Maybe it was my role as a Black female arts administrator in a very white town. Maybe it was my job to use this platform to lead the revolution. That's been a not kind of a stance that I came to overnight, but I'm really fired up about. Sorry, you might have to bleep that out. Much like Seattle did, we had the words or the phrase Black Lives Matter in white paint as a template that then artists came in and kind of filled out. And in the beginning days, we had people, driving by saying white power. We had people coming into the parking lot revving their engines. Several of the artists were harassed, but I will tell you this. While there was an incredible amount of tension when those letters were white and on the side of the building, as they began to fill in, the energy of that entire block shifted. Even the people who had a problem with it, in the first few days they were right there, then they got kind of a little bit further back and then a little bit further back. And I have a couple of different theories about that. I think whether you liked the mural or not, you saw the humanity in the person who was creating that. And so that changed, again, the dynamics of the space and the conversations that were happening. People spend 45 minutes per letter, and they bring entire families down to discuss with their children, with their significant others, what was happening in the mural, what could possibly be the message that the artists were trying to convey. They were meeting the artists and having conversations. From a very early age, I knew that I needed to be in conversation with and service to my community. And growing up, for me, that was really black and white. Make sure people's bellies are full. Make sure, kids are getting education. Kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and meeting kind of that lowest common denominator. Yes, we need to feed people's bellies, but we also need to feed their hearts, their minds, and their souls. The work never feels done, but when I can take a step back, or I literally have someone come to me and say, this is how Terrain has impacted my life, it's in those moments where I know I'm exactly where I need to be.